Can you tell me your name?
Peter Hyatt.
Okay, and what sort of stuff do you do, Peter?
I am a statement analyst, is one who does training in detecting deception in the written statement. So I do both in training of statement analysis and using it to assist in investigations around the country.
Okay, and what's your background and experience with that?
I first received training in this form of work in 2001. And from there I went to many trainings, either on statement analysis itself, legally sound interviewing, and from there I worked as a Child Protective Services investigator, where I was investigating allegations of abuse and neglect against children. So during a course of probably 10 years, I've conducted more than 5,000 interviews. So having the training in statement analysis allows me to put it into practice with the interviewing, where I'm able to tell if someone's telling the truth or they're withholding information. And oftentimes with the analysis being as strong as it is, as a powerful tool as it is, I'm able to tell that the missing information is critically withheld information, deliberately suppressed even, depending on the emotional content behind it. So currently I work full-time as an analyst, and I am training law enforcement, private companies, corporations, human resource professionals, psychology experts, medical doctors, attorneys, through my company.
Okay, and are there at least one or two examples of regional or national cases that you've done work for that you'd be able to share with us?
Yeah, I've done work on the baby Ayla Reynolds case a few years back. A little child went missing in Maine, and I was recently interviewed on a television program for that, in which I concluded for them that baby Ayla was not kidnapped, that the father, the biological father, according to the analysis, caused the child's death and was deceptively covering up what happened. So that was a recent case. And I've done quite a few other cases as well.
Okay. Is there an approximate percentage of cases that you're involved in, approximate of course, that your work leads to successful convictions?
I don't know if I could come up with a percentage. The analysis is so strong that it leads to confessions. And then with a confession, we have obviously an adjudication of the case. But I don't know that I could think of a percentage of that. It depends on the skill of the interviewer. I have offered in different cases to conduct the interview for law enforcement, wherever possible. It is cost prohibitive. A case that's on the other side of the country, they can't afford to bring someone in to interview. But I can train and assist the officers in the interview process. The interview comes most successfully when the analysis is well known. Statement analysis is a tool. It's one of many tools that law enforcement, for instance, uses to solve cases. But it is probably the most potent tool, because once we learn what happened from the person's own words, even in the polygraph, if we administer the polygraph with the subject's own words, it is near 100% foolproof. So a good polygrapher or a good polygraph examiner, if he is trained in statement analysis, he knows only use the subject's own words. He has, and we all do, we have a connection emotionally with our own words. And this is a really fascinating point. The average person has an internal dictionary of about 25,000 words. Someone that has a greater intelligence might be as high as 30,000. When they're asked, tell us what happened. For instance, if I said to you, what happened to you this morning? You would go into that dictionary of, let's say, 25,000 words. You must choose what words to use, what order to place the information, where to place each word next to each other, what verb tenses to use, what pronouns to use, and what information to leave out, all in less than a microsecond of time. The brain works that fast. When someone is deceptive, there is a slight disruption in that incredibly rapid processing of the brain. That's where they use extra words. We jump in and grab it. When I interview someone based on analysis, I will not interpret their words for them. That's not even legally sound. I ask them things like, what happened next? And if they use a word that needs clarification, I ask them to define the word. So if someone says, I saw a boy walking down the street. Now that boy could be 3 years old, he could be 21 years old. I don't know how old he is. I ask them, tell me what boy is, what boy means, what was the boy like? So I don't interpret someone's words, I let them interpret for me. It is a non-interpretive, non-intrusive method of interviewing. You tell me what happened. In a case of a missing person, we have expectations. We have things that we're looking for ahead of time, and we listen carefully. And if someone feels that they are being accused of causing a disappearance, they're going to tell me that they didn't do it. They're going to say that. A good example of that would be Lance Armstrong. Now, for years, Lance Armstrong has given many interviews. He was incessantly, at one point, speaking to the media. And in everything I covered over many years, not once did he ever freely, of his own accord, say, I didn't use PEDs. I didn't use performance-enhancing drugs. He said things like, I would never, or that's ridiculous, or in his case, he attacks the accuser. Not once in all the interviews has he ever said, I did not use performance-enhancing drugs. That would be a direct lie. And that means when he goes into that 25,000 or 30,000 word dictionary, he must interrupt the process of speaking from experiential memory to do this. There is a slight delay now in that less than a microsecond of time has now been cut into. That's where we catch our deception. So sometimes, and this comes up every so often, especially with police, where a police officer has graduated from street patrol to detective. He's good at what he does, and he's probably a kind of a gifted, intuitive listener. And I will say something in training like, this is a reliable denial. I, the pronoun I, didn't or did not, both are acceptable, and then the allegation is answered, use performance-enhancing drugs. If those three things are present with nothing else, you then ask, why should I believe you? If the person says, because I'm telling the truth, it is 99.9% going north likely that he didn't do it. And so every so often it will come up where a detective says, you're saying to me, if he says he didn't do it, the interview's over, he didn't do it? That's ridiculous. I just interviewed this guy for 3 hours, and all he did was tell me he didn't do it. So I say, let's get the transcripts. And so transcripts of the audio interview are made, and then we go through them very carefully. Not once did he ever say those words of his own accord. It's called the free editing process. It's where we freely choose our words. So if you said, Peter, did you use performance-enhancing drugs on Tuesday? I could say to you, no, I didn't use performance-enhancing drugs on Tuesday, by parroting your words. It's a very low-stress way of lying. However, while I'm freely choosing my words, going into that dictionary of my own, using my own words at my own pace, if I did use performance-enhancing drugs, I'm going to be almost incapable of saying those words. And so the same detective would look over 3 hours of transcripts and say, I can't believe it. Not once did he ever issue what we call a reliable denial. He told us what he would never do. He even said, didn't take him, didn't do it, by dropping the pronoun I. So it's quite an amazing thing, and that's statement analysis 101. Once they see that, they're hooked. They want to learn more. They're excited. When they realize how much information people give out, it's like going into an interview knowing exactly what happened gives a certain air of confidence that leads to more confessions. Because the subject is sitting there thinking, this guy knows. He knows. So if I know an area that's really sensitive to him, and I continue to ask him questions about that area of time, that particular point of time, he is unnerved. All I'm saying is, tell me about that. Tell me about that again. And he becomes unnerved, and out comes the confession. We are the only created entities that have a need to communicate. We have a need to tell. If someone is reluctant to speak, I might ask them, what did you do today? Or what do you do for a living? We all have it. When little Johnny comes home from school, he wants to tell you what he did. We all were created that way. So I get my information by listening. The analytical interview is probably 80 to 90% the subject speaking and me asking very simple questions and just listening. No compound questions, no leading questions. I don't need any challenges. If he wants his attorney present, I want his attorney present. I don't want to violate his civil rights. I wouldn't want him to violate mine. He can have 10 attorneys. I'm still going to get the truth because he can't help it. If he did it, he's going to let me know. It's almost impossible for any of us to lie. When there's training, we catch him.
All right, so can you tell me how you first became involved in the Katelyn Markham case?
Someone had sent me an email saying, hey, did you hear about another missing person? I've done work for the Center for Missing Persons as a volunteer for some of the families. It is a particular type of case that is loaded with emotions because there's nothing more frightening for us than the unknown. So when someone goes missing, that person is vulnerable. The family member or the loved one that's behind it is completely vulnerable to all sorts of shenanigans and troublemakers and people that want to impose themselves on a case. So I had received, and I don't recall from whom, but just, hey, would you please analyze this 911 call? And it was made by John Carter regarding then missing Katelyn Markham. And so I posted it on my blog, a very brief analysis, general analysis. The point of the blog is not to give complete analysis of anything. It's actually an advertising tool for my business. So a police officer might see that and say, hey, this is pretty good. Let me ask if I can get some training there. And then word of mouth goes from there. And that naturally led to departments asking for help. And then companies in hiring, because the Department of Justice told us 15 years ago that among people that steal from a company, 40% of them plan the theft during the interview process before they're actually hired. This theft does not include all the new exploitation where people are fraudulently claiming to be harassed, fraudulently claiming to have fallen and injured, fraudulently claiming to be in a hostile work environment. These are things that people plan so they can get their hands on money that their hands did not earn. And so by catching those who are deceptive in the interview process, companies can be protected from theft. A particular company that I've worked for the last 4 years has had a dramatic drop in theft because they're not hiring those who lie in the process. They're sifted out. Because of that, they've had a precipitous drop in unemployment claims. Their sales are up, morale is up. They've hired good people by using the system. And all we do is this. We ask, tell us what you'd like us to know about you. And this is from the privacy of their own home on an application. There's no pressure, there's no dress up for the interview, there's no interviewer's presence. It's low pressure, non-intrusive way of saying, hey, this is what I'm like, hire me. And we're able to use statement analysis to see if someone is telling the truth or if someone has an agenda. And it is quite amazing to show people who has an agenda before they're hired and what their agenda is. The agenda for going for a job is to provide for yourself and your family, to build your resume, to gain experience, to make money. When someone has an agenda that is something other than that, even a nefarious agenda, and a good example of that today is a social justice warrior. A social justice warrior is someone who is against something, and it defines who they are. So when we ask, tell us about yourself, they'll go into their social justice cause. They are very likely to have an event, even if they have to manufacture it, at the workplace for their cause because it defines them. It consumes their personalities. By weeding out those who have inappropriate motives for employment, you're able to hire the best and brightest. So it's a marvelous tool. And then if you have someone who makes a claim against your company, we want the truth. Our record is so strong because of two things. We tell the truth and we document. That's all. And if someone has been harassed at the job, the employers that I work for, they want them to be compensated. They want them to be protected. They're good employers. But they do not want to be taken advantage of in today's world where people lie with impunity about things that didn't happen.
Okay. And after you posted the analysis on your blog of the 911 call, a few weeks or months later, were you contacted by anyone to do any additional work or analysis about it?
Well, I had seen actually fairly closely afterwards that the caller of the 911 call, John Carter, had given an interview on radio. And that was quickly transcribed and sent to me saying, please analyze this. And so to introduce that is the chronology is very important. There is a 911 call, and then there is an interview less than a week later while Katelyn is still missing. And so if the 911 call has a conclusion, it will either be supported by the radio interview, negated by the radio interview, or left kind of neutral. So it becomes important. And I can address what we do with 911 calls in general if that would be helpful for the audience.
Sure, definitely.
A 911 call, sometimes it's called excited utterance, that the person is just speaking off the cuff and it's an emergency situation, and there are things that we look for in this. And so someone says, there's no book written about what you would react on a 911 call about a missing person. And the answer to that is, yes, there is. There is a large body of work, a lot of documentation about what 911 calls sound like when someone is calling as an innocent caller. What we do with a 911 call is look to classify it of one of two things. Either it's an innocent caller or a caller with guilty knowledge. And as any interviewer can attest to, and this means job interview, journalism, anyone else, 911 operators, it's an interview, question and answer. You are given one or two impressions. Either this person is working with me to facilitate the flow of information to find Katelyn, or he isn't. And that's the impression that most interviewers, 911 operators, police interviewers, business interviewers, journalists will have. Either this person is working with me to get the information going, or he's not. He's hindering the facilitation of information that will bring back Katelyn. So we begin with that first premise, is that this call should be someone who's looking to help find her. We also begin with the presupposition of innocence. Now, this is not an ethical or moral stance. Legally, John Carter is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. And what I say today is my opinion of the call, my analysis. We presuppose that the caller has no guilty knowledge of what happened to Katelyn. We do this for a purpose, a scientific purpose. We presuppose, therefore, in this presupposition, we have an expectation of what he's going to say. He's going to go into that dictionary of 25,000 to 30,000 words, and in less than a microsecond, he's going to tell us his priority. My fiancée, Katelyn Markham, is missing. That's his priority. We have a priority that's going to be an urgency about this. That's going to be his priority. We have an expectation that he is going to do everything he can to help them find her. We have an expectation that he's going to express concern about her. We have an expectation that he is going to ask for help for her. All very simple things that any of us would do if our loved one was missing. In the FBI Law Bulletin, it's a publication they put out, there was a short article about 911 calls by Dr. Susan Adams. And it's just a brief summary of what, like a checklist of what to look for. And as you presuppose innocence, in this presupposition, when you hear something that you were not expecting to hear, you now are confronted with what you did not think would be appropriate to hear. That will cause you as the analyst or the listener to pause and ask why. For example, in the research, and this, it comes actually from the general statement analysis principles itself, homicide calls that begin with a greeting are statistically likely to have a guilty caller. And it makes sense. If your fiance was missing, you're probably not going to start off with a hello. You're going to say right off the bat, my fiance and her name is missing. That's your priority. I worked on a case years ago, a little girl, Haley Cummings. She had gone missing. And the babysitter / stepmom called in. And she said, hello, the greeting. I was asleep. The door was open. And fourth or fifth down the line of her priority was, the child is missing. But before she went to the child was missing, she had to make sure they understood, I was asleep. Someone else did it. I wasn't involved. And that is to script an alibi before one's even accused. It's not a good signal. We also found that the words, I'm sorry, enter into the vocabulary of a guilty caller more times than not, for any reason. Even if it seems like a polite, I'm sorry, what did you say? As if to say, excuse me. The two words, I'm sorry, in a 911 call of a domestic homicide are red flagged for that purpose. When little Kaylee Anthony was missing, Cindy Anthony, the grandmother, had said, I'm going to call 911 unless you tell me what you did with her. And she made good on the threat. She picked up the phone, she called 911, and she put her daughter, Casey Anthony, on the phone. And one of the first things that Casey said was, I'm sorry. It is part of what we call leakage. The brain knows what happened. And the brain is so used to so many years of using the same language that these words come out. And they just leak out inadvertently, and this information is vital. We expect that when someone's missing, the caller is going to say, I'm concerned about what she's going through. When a baby goes missing, an innocent caller will say, I don't know if she has her baba or her little blankie, because there is this panic, a deep soul panic of the parent or loved one. What we do not expect is someone to talk about themselves, concern for themselves, not for the missing victim. When another girl named Haley Dunn went missing years ago from Texas, it's a case I worked on. One of the things the mother said on the Nancy Grace show was that she had a toothache. And if my child was missing, I wouldn't have the wherewithal to talk about my comforts or lack thereof. And so I had told investigators drugs are involved. Toothache, pain, narcotics, and sure enough, the mother ended up failing her polygraph, and drugs were heavily involved in that case. So we listen very carefully to what one says, and when they give us information that isn't even necessary, it becomes vitally important. So I'd like to look at that call, if we could, the 911 call.
Yes.
In an emergency setting, we have our expectation, and when the person speaks, we expect the person to go into a priority that says, you know what? My fiance, Katelyn Markham, is missing. We've got to find her. The call began with hi. So right away we were greeting. My name is John Carter. So I now know his name. So the first thing I know about it is we have a polite greeting. We don't have an expectation for politeness. Okay? I am not saying that he is a guilty caller because he said hi. What I'm saying is statistically, generally people are too much in a rush to be polite. The second thing he told me was, my name is John Carter. So he identified himself. That's number 2. I am calling. I know that you're not supposed to report a missing person before 24 hours. So he started with a greeting. He gave his name, and then he's telling them, I'm a rule keeper. I'm a law-abiding citizen. I know you're not supposed to call before 24 hours. This is not necessary information. You need to get to what's wrong. Then he said, my fiance is missing. And we look at that as a social introduction. In statement analysis, we listen carefully to how someone is introduced. He gave his full name correctly, John Carter, but he didn't give the victim's name. My fiance, Katelyn, is missing. My fiance, Katelyn Markham, is missing. That tells us, in our rules of social introductions, there is a problem with the relationship. So if I said, my ex-wife, Sally, that has the possessive pronoun my, her title of ex-wife, and her name, Sally, that says they may be divorced, but they have a good working relationship. If I said, my ex-wife, I've now reduced that. If I said, the ex, with the article the, I'm now saying there's a problem there. So we have an incomplete social introduction, which tells me there is a problem in the relationship between him and Katelyn at this particular time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to listen very carefully to how he refers to her. She's missing. So what I expect to hear is her name used quite often. But then he said something that's very disturbing. He said, I can't find her anywhere. So if someone said to you, I can't find her anywhere, the first thing you're going to say is, where have you been looking? When a child goes missing, let's say a toddler, the scope or the geographical scope, say, is small. The toddler, you're going to look, I looked under the bed, I looked in the closets, I looked behind this, behind that, where she plays hide and seek, that sort of thing. An adult, the scope is much broader. So have you been to the stores, the malls, the hospitals, the emergency rooms? Have you checked everything? Because he can't find her anywhere. Okay? It's a very pessimistic thing to say. O.J. Simpson said something similar. He said, I will search for the real killer of Nicole for the rest of my life. And I believe him. Because he'll never find the real killer because he is the killer. And so therefore he gives this pessimistic for the rest of my life, giving no hope of recovery. There is a presupposition and an expectation of optimism. That I'm going to find Katelyn. Katelyn will be found. It's okay. But what I have here is 4 pieces of information regarding him and an incomplete piece of information regarding the victim. All I know about the victim is her relationship to him. I don't even know her name yet. So let's listen as it continues. So his order and priority put more emphasis. 4 times he referenced himself. Only once was about her. He gave us an incomplete social introduction, which suggests there is a problem in the relationship. I move on. The dispatcher said, okay, where did you see her last? Because the dispatcher heard this, and I think the dispatcher did a good job. She heard this. I can't find her anywhere. That means he's looked at specific places and he's thinking of a specific place. I can't find her anywhere. Keep that in mind as I go along. Where did you see her last? Okay. The operator asks, give me the location where you last saw her. John Carter refuses to answer. He says this, I saw her at like 12 o'clock last night. She stays in a house by herself. So I'm really nervous. Her car's still there. Her purse is still. So I look at what he said and I follow his words and I do not interpret them. He said, which is a pause. Now, when a person goes missing, the loved one that was with them the last time they saw them, they have an extremely high hormonal response. They are on high alert. The hormones are through the roof. And one of the things they're focusing on was those last precious moments together. Does this answer contain the location? Means he pauses. He needs to think about this before he answers it. Right away, that's point number 1 of sensitivity. I saw her at like 12 o'clock last night. That answers the question, when did you see her last? Not where. I'm not interpreting, I'm listening. Then we have a point of deception. She stays in a house by herself. I'm really nervous. Now he's talking about his emotions. I haven't heard him express anything to show what Katelyn, missing, vulnerable, is going through, but I'm hearing him talk about himself again. He said she stays in a home by herself. Okay, stays is present tense. Where did you see her last? He says when, around what time, and then he went into the present tense. And this is what I was referencing when I talk about someone who is a habitual liar. If I accused you of using cocaine last Tuesday at the workplace, you would say to me, Peter, I didn't use cocaine. I don't do any drugs. That you don't do drugs came after your initial denial. You said, I didn't use drugs on Tuesday, or I didn't use drugs at the workplace. You flat out denied it. If you had said to me, I said, you're accused of using cocaine at the workplace last Tuesday, and you say, I don't do drugs, you have avoided answering the allegation, and you're telling us in the present tense what you do. He avoided saying where he last saw her. When someone avoids a question, the question itself is very sensitive. So if I ask you a question, hey, are you planning a surprise party for me today? And you say, well, am I planning a surprise party for you? And you repeat the question, you're avoiding giving me an answer. Probably planning a party. That's what we do to avoid a direct confrontation of a lie, is we go into this present tense. It's a distraction or a red herring to pull it away. So he tells us what she does normally, not where he saw her.